Hi, I'm Stephen with AlbertaUrbanGarden.ca. We continue to harvest ever-increasing amounts of crops from our Zone 3 garden. With fall fast approaching, we continue to enjoy fresh fruits and vegetables with almost every meal. In order to support one of my ongoing goals to save money by producing more of my own food, we've started to preserve a lot of that surplus food that we can't simply eat fresh. My hope is that we can continue to enjoy our garden produce over the cold winter months. Today I thought I would go through some of the methods that I will be using to preserve crops from my garden. The simplest thing to do to preserve your crops is to find somewhere cold to store them. Places like cold cellars or root cellars often keep the temperatures around 4 Celsius or 40 Fahrenheit. Shelf-stable things like squash, potatoes, and other root crops will often stay good at that temperature for many months. Usually cold cellars are dug below ground where the soil insulates the room from both heat and cold. Although I don't have a cold cellar, I usually store my potatoes in the basement where it is cooler. I have them in a dark and dry location just off the ground. My potatoes are usually good this way for a few months. An alternative to having a cold storage location is to toss those crops in the refrigerator. However, if you're anything like us, real estate in the refrigerator is limited, and we usually don't have enough space for all the crops that I produce. Some crops, such as berries, you can toss into the freezer for later. However, other crops may require a different approach. Dehydrating crops is an easy method to preserve them, and you can usually store them in somewhere like your kitchen where they can be easily accessed for use later. Dehydrators come in very cheap to very expensive models. What I have found for dehydrating garden produce, the cheaper models work perfectly fine. The only feature I look for is variable temperature control, as herbs keep their flavor better when dehydrated at lower temperatures, whereas fleshier things like peppers need a higher temperature in order to dehydrate them completely. One of my favorite things to do with my dehydrator is to process excess peppers, onions, garlic, and tomatoes. I then use the food processor to turn the mixture into powder. In order to keep my dehydrated produce good, I make sure to store them in sealed containers, like a mason jar, to keep the moisture out. I love using my pepper topping on eggs or to season homemade tomato sauce. Speaking of tomato sauce, canning is another great way to preserve crops. Canning does take a little bit of equipment and time, however, once you get going, you can preserve a lot of food. This year was the first year that my heirloom grapes from my grandfathers produced. So we decided, when it was time to harvest and what we did not eat fresh, we were going to turn into jam and jelly and then can it. As both our jam and jelly turned out fantastic, I'll put a link to the recipes that I used in the description below. What I found to be a great gift for Christmas is wine and cider that I have made from my garden produce. Although you're not preserving food per se, it is a great way to use the excess produce such as apples, rhubarb, strawberry, and even sour cherries. Brewing is fairly simple to get into, and by watching local buy and sell websites, I've been able to get the equipment that I need at a fraction of the cost. Our family favorites are the hard apple cider that I make from Alberta apples and rhubarb wine. Not all of these methods will work for each crop, so I usually treat each crop individually and try to find the best method of preserving. If I do end up having wastage from the produce here, I make sure to write it down and incorporate it into next year's plan, because I really want to optimize the use my family gets from all of the produce that is produced within my garden space. Preserving crops by dehydrating them, canning them, or using them to brew allows us to take the wonderful crops that we've produced and spread out the enjoyment over the cold winter months. It is also a great way for my wife, son, and I to share the bounty of our garden with our friends and family. If you'd like to learn how to grow a lot of food in a small space, check out the link on screen now, and make sure to subscribe to catch all future episodes.